Huh? What? Oh, you're looking at me? You're looking at me? Hey, yeah, my room is a disaster, okay? It's a disaster right now. I'm going through an old box of fanzines. Look at all kinds of fanzines in here. There's stuff in here. Look, it's Slam Bang. Al Freeman's a great comic. And an old Sears catalog. There's an old Sears catalog. It's a Sears 8mm movie catalog. Advertises 8mm films from the 1900s, anytime in the 1900s, all the way back to the early 1900s. I got my copy of The Great Train Robbery from here. I'm already distracted. This is Bill Schelly. Hey, this video is supposed to be for you, but somehow I'm getting distracted already. Yeah, I used to order from this catalog. Back in the 60s, well, I was just a kid, man. I had an old Brownie box camera. I used to make films. And here we've got all these old videos. Here's the Keystone Cops from 1916. You used to be able to order all this stuff. Here's Harry Langdon. The early 1900s, the Little Rascals. Yeah, you used to be able to order all this stuff. Yeah, from this old catalog. Anyway, I've always been a fan of nostalgia ever since I can remember, ever since I was little. There's the issue of Mighty Mouse that Jim Mayne published, and I had a story published printed in here, back in, what was that, like 68 or something? Had a Kurt Swan cover. That cover's by Kurt Swan, and yeah, John McLaughlin, yeah. So anyway, and I got sniffles. I got sniffles. It's a terrible thing, man. I got this box of tissue, right here next to Famous Monsters of Filmland magazine, number 36. A Warren publication, a Warren magazine. So yeah, we're getting somewhere. We're getting close to where we want to be. We're going to talk about Bill Schelly. Now, Bill Schelly has this great new book out, okay? James Warren, Empire of Monsters. James, here it is. Where is it? There it is. James Warren, Empire of Monsters. Biography by Bill Schelly. And it's the whole story of Jim Warren. And can you believe the battery is dying on this camcorder? Unbelievable. Here I'm ready to make this video and the battery dies. Okay, we'll be back shortly, folks. Okay, so I'm going to try this again. I charged up the battery for about a half hour, so you know, you have to charge it for hours, so I'm hoping that's enough to get us through this darn video. Oh, by the way, that was a kind of an awkward start. Let's start over. Hello everyone, this is Steve, the Classic Comics Man, talking at you from my Steve Keeter channel, the Classic Comics Man channel. I took that one down a while back, along with the Loathly Daddy channel, a while back, but I kind of missed the Classic Comics Man channel because it was only about comics, and I reviewed lots and lots of especially classic comics. Old comics especially during the period when I grew up in the 1960s, the comics I read as a kid, but also lots of other stuff, comics fanzines, UFO, the UFO Co-op, I reviewed their zines, and everything. Anyway, it all ties together. Comics, monsters, heroes, nostalgia. Speaking of monsters and heroes, I found my collection of Larry Ivy's Monsters and Heroes here too. As I was going through all this, here's issue number 7, by golly. Yeah. Issue number 6. Number 5. Right. I love Larry Ivy's artwork. And Larry Ivy comes up. Number 4. Somehow I ended up with 2 copies of number 3. That's right. There's number 3. That's Altron Boy, Larry Ivy's classic superhero. Youthly superhero. Number 2. And number 1, first issue. Larry Ivy comes to mind because apparently he was associated with the creation of Creepy and Creepy, EERIE, VAMPIRELLA, or Warren magazine's great comics, famous comics that followed. The new EC, they began calling it. They had great comics art, great stories, and oh look what else I found. I can see how easily I get distracted. Castle of Frankenstein number 1. I used to love Castle of Frankenstein too. Yeah. I keep digressing all over the place. It's just that kind of day. It's just that kind of day. It's just a nutty day, right? I mean, just like I think crazy think. When I looked at this issue of Famous Monsters here, and there's Lon Chaney Jr. as the Mummy. The Mummy's Ghost. There's kind of a film book in here of the Mummy's Ghost. And right next to it, and we got some Altoids. Don't you think, if this guy's been in a tomb for a couple thousand years or whatever, when he wakes up, he's got to have some really bad breath. So it's appropriate that these Altoids are sitting next to the Mummy here, which is sitting next to James Warren, Empire of Monsters. That's what we're supposed to be talking about. Yep. And Bill is probably unfamiliar with my videos, so he doesn't, quite know what a nut I am. I gotta say, let me mention a couple of things. Right, I mentioned that Warren magazines were kind of a follow-up or kind of a, well, they came after EC, and EC Comics was kind of, well, they were pushed out of business. We all know that. And then came the onset of the Comics Code, in which Warren, James Warren, he got past that easily by publishing magazines, not comics, but magazines that contain comics. Actually, it started with Famous Monsters. Actually, it started before that because he started publishing before that, but really quick. He noticed the the monster craze of the 50s that began happening, and a resurgence of interest in the old Universal and classic horror films, and also such things as the Hammer films. And yeah, I'm having a bad hair day too. I mean, everything is going nuts today. But anyway, Bill Schelly. Bill Schelly came along somewhere long after James Warren, but he's been around for years, publishing Sense of Wonder, one of the all-time great fanzines. I remember back in the early 70s is when it really started for me. It started in the late 60s, early 70s when I first started publishing fanzines and stuff. I used to see his work, and Chuck Robinson had a lot of issues of Sense of Wonder. And my friend Chuck Robinson II was a fanzine editor back in the days. He published Comique. And Bill Schelly did work for him. And so my association with Bill Schelly before now, we really never I sent him just recently a message on Facebook, and he responded really quick, and he's a gracious, kind, and a person I respect very much, and he's written numerous books that I want to get. This is the first one of his books that I've actually purchased, published by Gary Groth. It's available on Amazon and stuff, folks. If you miss everything else in this video, check it out. Check out on Amazon. You can get your copy of James Warren, Empire of Monsters. And anyway, there was this old issue of Comique here, and my issue's kind of tattered. The back cover's kind of ripped off. I mean, it's all there, but oh, there's Bill Schelly. He did the cover for Comique number, what was this? Number 9. This was in 1972, and Bill Schelly was doing the O'Brien Gang for Chuck Robinson. And I came along about this time, and this was an old Ditto zine. It had an offset cover, but it was an old Ditto zine done by the Ancient Spirit Duplicator Process. So when was this? He didn't put a date on this. Chuck, what's the heck's the matter with it? That's how Chuck looked at the time. I remember because, I'd been drawing comics on lined notebook paper and stuff for years and years. It wasn't until I met Chuck Robinson that I began learning about fandom and the Small Press Network. It wasn't called Small Press at that time. It was they were called fanzines there, and the whole fan network. I started to become associated with that. Bill Schelly had another O'Brien Gang story in this issue of Comique here with Brian Lee's halftone front cover. And it's in here, but it's in glorious purple ditto somewhere in here. Here it is, the O'Brien Gang, faded purple ditto. This type of method of printing was abandoned for exactly this reason. Well, you had some great artists who were working in the medium. Their work over a period of time, this faded purple stuff became even more faded. and so the quality, you know, wasn't that great and has faded over time. The only connection I have with Bill, as I mentioned earlier, was in that same issue. There's an ad for my first comics fan or comic of any substance, small press comic, and that was #1. And there I am, Steve Keeter, and that's my old address. So yeah, there we go. I had worked by Charlie Smith and Steve Shipley and you know, some really great people, but it came about as an inspiration from Chuck Robinson. But I remember the O'Brien gang, and I remember the work that Bill was doing for Chuck. And you know, I want to downplay this because it was in Ditto, and it was a long time ago, and Bill's come a long time since those days, and he's written numerous books that I want to get a hold of, some about fandom and fandom topics and fandom in the early days, and that would be, you know, a lot of the 1960s fanzines that he talked about, and that was kind of, I got into it, like my first fanzine was in 1969. It was an Edgar Rice Burroughs fanzine, and then I discovered a superhero fandom when Chuck Robinson, I became associated with him. I was very young. I was just in high school, but he was a teacher at the school that I worked at, and he heard from other people that there's this guy, he draws comic books, just like the real ones. The real ones? And so somehow we were introduced, and actually my artwork was not that great. It was pretty amateurish back in those days, and he gave me a lot of pointers. He actually influenced me, and you know what he did? He got me copying Jack Kirby. He got me copying Kirby, and I started drawing like Kirby for a while, but then I eventually developed my own style, and so occasionally I still draw comics to this day. This is one of my characters. I'm a man. His name came from the fact that he's kind of egotistical. He's like, I'm a man. It's a joke, but I'm writing a new story for Jim Maine. It's going to have him and the Beacon, some of my characters. The Beacon was actually created by somebody else, but that goes way back too. And the hydraulic press man, a guy who lost his mouth and had it replaced with a hydraulic press so he could chomp down on police cars and stuff like that and destroy them. Oh, Bill, I'm sorry. I've digressed all over the place again. Where were we? EC Comics. EC Comics died. Was pretty much forced out of business. People were going nuts. There was Dr. Frederick Wortham and people who said that comic books were poisoning the minds of young people, and it's all history now. And EC Comics, the entire line disappeared, with Mad Magazine being the only leftover. And there's a connection there. Harvey Kurtzman did work for James Warren, as detailed in the book, during the early days, and later he went on to do Little Annie Fanny. Well, he was, of course, Harvey Kurtzman, a legend. But in Little Annie Fanny, there was a connection there because James Warren, what a dynamic publisher, and he kind of thought of himself, though, as a Hugh Hefner type figure. And in his own way, he had as big an influence as Hugh Hefner, but in a totally different kind of way. And you know what? All kinds of amazing facts in this book. Did you know that Gloria Steinem worked for James Warren? She worked for him and his magazines in the early days? I didn't know that. But yeah, that's a fact. And going back to the Warren influence, the EC influence, I keep going away from. Warren managed to bring some of the old EC artists to work for him, and he had people like Al Williamson and Wally Wood and others, and just great artists like Steve Ditko. And in the early days, man, the Warren magazines, the early Creepies and Eerie's and everything, were magnificent. Famous Monsters was, you know, the magazine, although written for 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds, whatever, but it was still, you know, one of the great, and remains one of the greatest monster magazines ever published. But I was at a convention in the early 1970s with Chuck Robinson. I remember we were there, we met Mike Kaluta, and Kaluta was hanging out in the hotel room because Chuck was a kind of guy who made you kind of want to hang out with him. So we had Kaluta in the room. We were all talking about artwork, and he was discussing doing work for Chuck. Although Chuck disappeared after that for a while and didn't publish for decades, and still hasn't. We're still waiting for him to come back. I've been in contact with him once in a while, but you know, it's been a long time. It takes a while to get back into it. But I remember that Wally Wood was at that convention, and he gave a talk, so we went to see him. And you know, and I remember because we used to kind of kid around about Wally Wood and the shadows that he would put on, like one side of the face would have a shadow on it, his artwork. And so, because we were all reading Thunder Agents at the time, we were crazy about Wally Wood, and he really was one of the all-time greats, and one of the great science fiction comic artists too. But Wally Wood was at the convention, and he was saying, this is the early 70s, that James Warren, that he had succeeded in creating a new EC, that he had every bit as that he had achieved every bit the magnificence that EC Comics had attained in the 50s, but he said they had since lost their way. And as detailed in the book, James Warren had his ups and downs, and a lot happened. And he had great people like Archie Goodwin and Bill Dubay later that came along that were editing the books. Louise, anyway, anyway, let's take a look here. I remember this one here. There's some stills. This is a story that had this creepy guy in a theater, this Phantom of the Opera type guy, and he's playing music for silent films, and it actually had pictures. It was a kind of a combination of famous monsters and creepy area. Was this published in Creepy number 13? It had actual photos, and I remember that story being really cool. I used to buy this stuff when I was a kid. When I was a kid, before I grew up, the Blazing Combat advertisements for the early issues of Blazing Combat, a war magazine that was like totally anti-war, but it was a great magazine. You know, he had artwork by like people like Gray Morrow. That just he just really assembled the cream of the crop of just the greatest artists and writers of his day. Here's Al Williamson. Al Williamson is magnificent as ever, in a story that's kind of like about Jim Warren himself, in a parody sort of thing, where the artists are all mad at the publisher because they're not getting paid or whatever. So what does he do? He shoots them all. Okay, maybe that was a warning to those guys. But it details the entire story of James Warren. Way too much to get into, especially with me digressing all over the place. With way too much to get into right now, except to say that it's a great book, folks. If you want to order it, like I say, it's at Amazon. It may be, I'm sure it's in other places, but that's where I found my copy. And I really enjoyed reading this comic. This comic. See, I got comics on the brain, which is good, and that's fine. It's been that way my entire life. And in 1982, he published the last 4 issues as the company went bankrupt and sold off all its holdings. Here were the last issues of Famous Monsters, Creepy, Eerie, and Vampirella. But there's a wealth of great material in here. Here he is, Jim Warren at work, sometime in the mid-1970s. Yep, the great publisher. And it details how everything fell apart, and then he brought everything back years later. Reed Crandall, from an Archie Goodwin story. Archie Goodwin was always my favorite writer for Warren Publishing. And here he is in his artwork on an adaptation, Reed Crandall's artwork, based on Archie Goodwin's script for an adaptation of The Telltale Heart in Creepy number 3. So, and you know what, just something else. I remember reading in here, there was a time, as I said, Warren Publishing had its ups and downs, and the superhero craze of the 1960s, starting with the Batman TV series, took them off guard, and monsters became less interesting, and this whole pop culture superhero phenomenon that was, you know, it was the Batman gosh wow kind of pop culture explosion. The superheroes weren't taken seriously the way they are today. It was like, you know, total parody. Actually, as a kid, I had a love-hate relationship, because even by that time, I felt, oh, well, I was born in 1956, so by 1966, I was 10 years old, but I was mature enough to know that I wanted the comics and taken seriously. And I knew that, you know, there were people out there like Stan Lee and Marvel Comics, and they were writing comics that were much more serious. And of course, Creepy and Eerie, those are horror comics, and so they were definitely more serious, but they were more on an adult level. They weren't written for kids anymore, but it took a while for the public, many years, for them to wake up to it before we could get to the point today where superheroes are treated respectfully with fantastic budget, giant CGI spectaculars like, you know, the latest Avengers movie or whatever. Anyway, but there was a downturn in sales when the superhero craze became popular, and Warren and his company, Captain Company, which did all the merchandising, offered all the monster masks and all the toys and artifacts and stuff, and 8mm films and everything. They made a lot of their money. If the books didn't sell, they sold a lot of merchandise. And they jumped on the superhero bandwagon, began selling some superhero merchandise. And I didn't realize that this isn't mentioned in the book, okay? But I had purchased this years ago. I remember this when it first came out in the 1960s. This issue of it says, On the Scene presents Superheroes. That's when the Batman movie came out, and this has got articles and stills and stuff. We just came out in the 60s. It was huge for me because I began learning about the old movie serials. Flash Gordon, Captain Marvel, The Phantom, Captain America, the old movie serials. And I bought this when it was on the stands. Years later, I got another copy at a convention. And this, I didn't know it until just now, was a Warren magazine. It was published by Warren Publishing back in 1966. What do you know? It's not mentioned in Bill Schelly's book. But I just happened to come across it when I was going through these old fanzines and comics and stuff. And guess what? That darn battery's going dead again. So I'm going to pause it, and we're going to get to the end of this shortly. Have you had enough meandering nonsense? If not, stay tuned. I will be back. Alrighty. I went through the whole thing, all the comments about James Warren and everything, without mentioning Forrest J. Ackerman, you know, who's, of course, the world famous, you know, the guy, the editor of Famous Monsters of Filmland magazine. And gotta say something about Forry. I mean, we missed the guy, and I mean, he was obviously a great guy, and his personality permeated every single issue of that pun-laden monster magazine, Famous Monsters. He had the Dracula cape, the original Dracula cape that Bela Lugosi used to wear, and you know, and he did all his work from the Acker Mansion, and yeah. So when he and I, it wasn't me and him, but it was James Warren and him had a little bit of a falling out just in the early '80s, just as Warren stopped publishing. But he came back later when someone else had the rights, and the rights to James Warren's books went to various places, and there were lawsuits, and there was all kinds of stuff that happened when Warren eventually came back years later and to reclaim his empire, and he's still around to this day. He's still around, and he's married to, what was it, Louise Jones. Yeah, I mentioned her earlier, and I couldn't think of her last name, but she was married to Bruce Jones, or was it Bruce Jones or Jeff Jones? I think it was Bruce Jones. And Jeff Jones, and that reminds me of Web of Horror, which was another magazine that Warren considered competition. That was a killer magazine. I think it had worked by Bernie Wrights and a lot of other great people. Man, I remember there were 3 issues of that book, and it was outstanding. No wonder Warren was worried about the competition. That was a great book. But again, you see, the thing is, I could talk for hours because there's so much to talk about, and that's part of the reason that I'm trying to cram so much information in here. Let's just say that James Warren, I mean, he has an important place in my life, and all of you guys who love monsters and great comics and everything else, James Warren's right up there at the top because of what he did for all of us. He published, some of the greatest horror comics ever done in the early days, with the great artists that he had, and then later with the Spanish artists that he brought in, and but yeah, and we're just awful glad to have this book finally. It came out of the blue, didn't expect it, but here it is again, James Warren, Empire of Monsters. A biography by Bill Schelly. Check it out, folks. Check it out. Now, real quickly here, because this video has gone on for a ridiculous length. I don't know how long, but it's really long. But I haven't been keeping track because, well, the battery keeps freaking dying. But my friend Larry Johnson, whom I've known for so many years, since the early 1970s when we were in the United Fanzine organization together. And, well, I mean, if you don't know Larry Johnson, you're missing out because he's one of the greatest, most talented artists, writers I've ever known, with an incredible imagination. And after all these years, every year he just keeps getting better. And he just, it's an imagination without limits. He's created a total fantasy world with all his Madame Boogaloo and Lou Brown and all the other stuff that he does. Zooey. He has characters that he created when he was a kid on lined notebook paper, as did I, or in little compositions books, and I did the same thing, and we'll see. Some of that's in his book Random Access number 3. And the thing is, I don't have a hard copy of this, but I do have a PDF of it. So here it is, Random Access number 3. I'm just going to have to scroll down here. This is a United Fanzine organization, a publication, and well, let me see what we got here. I call myself an artist, and not just because I wanted to give myself some highfalutin title or to give people the impression that I'm on some sort of important mission. I identify with the term because I actually make art on a regular basis, almost daily, and I've done so ever since I was a small child. And that's Larry Johnson. He's one of the most prolific creators you could ever imagine. And here he is. Here he is today. He actually teaches art. He's got a sign here. Art is fun. There's Larry. There's Larry, whom we've known for all these years. I mean, how many decades has it been now? 74, 84, 94, 2004, 2000. I've known this guy for 45 years, man. And what a pleasure to know him. His artwork, his paintings, here's an acrylic he did here. And, but going on and on. He has here you go, he has Space Cat. He can do beautiful paintings, often of nature and fantasy and weird science fiction topics. He has a character called Space Cat who seems to be in a constant war with giant bugs and mosquitoes and stuff. Space Cat seems to always win out, and he just flies off. Now he won my heart right away with this issue when he started talking about the comics from the 1960s that influenced him. And of course, the issues of Tales to Astonish with Giant Man and the Hulk were a massive influence on me. I loved those comics. It's one reason I love the recent Avengers movie. To me, this was the Tales to Astonish number 69. In this particular issue, this actually came to a culmination. It all kind of started here, and it went along. By the time he got to this issue, his war with the leader, another gamma-radiated villain, actually, with a huge brain, a huge intellect, but he was such a trouble for the Hulk. It ended here, because at the end of this issue, the Hulk was killed. Actually, he wasn't killed by the leader, he was killed by the Army, the U.S. Army, who came in when he was turning back from the Hulk to Bruce Banner, and he was vulnerable, and they shot him. By golly, what a revolting development that was. Oh yeah, but Larry's showing me covers and stuff, reproductions of comics, and most of these I had as a kid. I was born in '56, the early '60s. I grew up on the Marvel, and I never had this issue of Strange Tales. the Human Torch versus the Thing, the Thing versus Submariner. Also with Doctor Strange. Never had this issue. If anybody has hundreds of dollars, you want to buy that and send it to me for Christmas, I'd appreciate it. If you don't know it, I still love you. Don't worry about it. Yeah. So he's going back and he's examining the comics he read as a kid. The great Infantino artwork on The Flash. Wow. Man, those early issues were so classic. Hard to believe I used to own all of this stuff. And hard to believe that I actually sold it. I just hate myself for that, but life goes on. And I don't have the comics collection I used to have. He's going to the 80-page giants here, but I'm happy with what I got. Superman, these issues, the showdown between Superman, Luthor and Superman on a red sun planet where Superman had no powers. Ouch, that hurt. My favorite issue of Superman was the story of Superman Red and Superman Blue back in 1963, and I still have that comic. Here he gets into Archie comics, but we're going to scroll down because, like I said, this video is crazy. I like this. The biker gang. I wanted to join a biker gang. I needed to submit a written essay. I handed it to the head man. Here's this biker dude. This is very well written. Excellent, in fact. However, you don't meet our requirements. You can't join us. I was pissed. One of them had my bag. Give me my effing bag, you GD frickin' fraggin' flugenflagger. And these guys are like, wow, what a mouth on that guy. Yeah, but he still can't join. He's like, the hell with you. And Larry did that in 2015. The Nuts newspaper. This is cool because this is what I was talking about earlier. Comics done on lined paper on old composition books, and I did tons of them. I should dig them out, but not right now. This isn't my video. This video is for you guys. By golly, we're not talking about me. Egomania aside, it's your turn. So, the Nuts newspaper, something he did. He said by age 10 in 1964, and these are stuff that he did. He did many years. 72 issues of Zooey and lots of other comics that he did. And look at this. This is just awesome that he saved this stuff over all these years. I wish I had all the stuff that I had done when I was younger. Larry seems to have had a lot of his stuff. Here he is talking about the Beatles and Beatlemania, you know, in the mid-60s. And he's just a kid. I mean, look, you know, his artwork is, you know, it's the beginnings of some great artwork. And, you know, I mean, it's still a blast to look at this even now. And this is wonderful nostalgia. Whoa, what's that? But wonderful nostalgia, and wonderful to see this, the evolution of a creative individual at its beginning. And so just scrolling down. As I said, I don't have a hard copy, but so cool. Random find. It appears that he went through some boxes or something, and just like me, he's finding stuff that he'd forgotten about. And here's some Beatles cards and Batman. I remember these Batman bubblegum cards when they came out way back in the 60s. I had a lot. I think I probably had pretty much all of those back in those days. You know, I don't have anything. I don't have all that stuff anymore, but I do have a memory of all that stuff. And I'm glad it's there in my mind because I've always loved comics and fantasy and science fiction and all of that. I've always loved it all my life. You know, I was like, you know, kind of a small kid. I wasn't tall. I was skinny. I was kind of nerdy, you know, and people, I had friends, or so-called friends, schoolmates that made fun of me and stuff. My stepdad was in the military. We went from school to school, and it was hard to adjust. And so during these times of difficulty, you know, one thing that got me through was my love for comics. I've loved them all my life, and I've been reading them all my life. You know, when I was a kid, I can remember my brothers and I would get in fights. My brothers would pick on me because they were taller. And you know what I did? I went in the closet, and like my aunt remember this. Well, my mom, she's passed away, but my aunt Kathy remembers this. I would go in the closet with a flashlight and look at comic books and read comics in the closet. Nobody bothered me there, and I was in my own world, and I sure did enjoy it. So, no big deal. I survived all that, and I love my brothers, and you know, we all grew up and got over all that junk, but yeah, that fantasy world, sure, it's not real, it's fantasy. But man, what a great world to escape to. Yeah, so LarryJohnson knows all about that world. He's been involved with it since he was a kid also. And here he is, he was doing fashion comics that he did for himself, and he colored them and everything, fashion designs and stuff that he did many years ago. He said he used a spirograph for some of these. There you go, you can see that. Spirograph and this fantasy fashions and stuff is what he got into. There's that spirograph. I had one of those when I was a kid too, by golly. So yeah, what else we got? Because this keeps going on and on. This is a big issue. This is a big issue. Now listen, if you want to order this, just send me a message, a private message or whatever, and I'll send you the ordering info. Okay? And you can see this is there's 71. So we're starting out in the 60s, and here we go. We're getting a little better. Larry's art is getting more sophisticated. You see that? And he's drawing beautiful women here. And as he goes on, now he's doing paintings, oil paintings on canvas. Here's what this one is, 1999. Okay, 1999. I love the nature paintings that he does. Now he goes through 40 years of self-portraits. Larry through the years. Here I am, he says, starting at age 21 in this school portrait. And there he was, Larry at age 21. And we go down the line and we see Larry. There he goes, Larry. Yep, there you go, Larry, with mustache. He's always had that mustache. I had one too for many years, and I shaved it. I look like a different guy. I'm not as good looking as Larry is, but I do my best. Anyway, my fiance loves me, so that's a good thing, right? Hi, BB, I just had to mention you. Here he is, Larry getting older. Kind of an expressionistic portrayal there. Getting older here, growing up, more mature. And there he is, there's Zooey, his interesting comic book and unusual comic book character that he's done ever since the beginning. LarryJohnson, with looking very much as he does today. And then we're back to Space Cat at the end, and he's still fighting, this time a giant fly, okay? So, yeah. Oh, the Horseman. He's got the Horseman. It's a fantasy creation. I'm using that fantasy word a lot. But the Horseman is a guy with the head of a horse. And apparently some people find that disturbing or something. I mean, what's so disturbing about it? It's fantasy. What do you want? I mean, like even like the Egyptians, they have what? Like the Sphinx has got like the body of a lion and the head of a man. I mean, come on. We can handle this. We can handle this sort of thing. Mythology and fantasy and all of this. It's okay. And gosh, what great drawings. The coloring is beautiful. And Larry just does an awesome job. He always does. And I've loved his work for so many years. So anyway, yeah, this is Larry's, here he got a letter column at the end. And so there you go. That's Random Access number 3, folks. Check it out. Check out Bill Schelly's book. And, you know, thanks for tuning in. Here I am with Castle of Frankenstein #1 in a blurry picture just because I felt like posting that. I took it with a computer camera, which doesn't take very good photos. And here I am in real life. Ah! More scary than the monsters. But thanks for tuning in. Thanks for tuning in to this very long video, enduring my fever blister, and all this random meandering nonsense. I went all over the place in this video with the battery dying and everything else. I mean, this one took some work, folks. So I hope you guys appreciate it. Now, I got an idea. I was thinking about restarting my old Classic Comics Man channel. I used to have 3 channels. The Loathly Daddy was all my vlogs and crazy stuff that I did with costumes and wigs and makeup. I did a lot of crazy stuff, science fiction and just funny satire stuff. There was the Classic Comics Man channel. This was devoted entirely to reviews of comics and movies and magazines and everything devoted to fantasy and science fiction and all of that. And like this particular video would have been on the Classic Comics Man channel. For some crazy reason, I got rid of those channels. There was a point a few years ago where I felt like I was starting all over again. I wanted to start fresh, so I deleted my old YouTube channels and I started this channel under my real name, Steve Keeter or Stephen Keeter. And I'm thinking about restarting the Classic Comics Man channel just for this particular specialized audience. Guess what? The battery's dying again. That's all I gotta say now. Tell me what you think about that. Should I restart that channel or not? I gotta go. Love you guys. Best to all of you. Best to you, Bill. Best to you, Larry. I gotta go. Bye-bye. Have a great day.